Hello everybody, Void here coming back at you all with another video covering the Zendikar Rising spoilers, as well as some of the Zendikar Rising Commander cards from that Commander product that's coming out here soon. Last time where we left off, Lithoform Engine was one of the big spoilers, I would say, for the 7th of September. But now we have the 9th, and we're covering some of the leftovers from the 7th and the 8th that I didn't get to. So we got quite a few cards here. Skyclave Relic, 3 mana artifact with a kicker cost of 3. I'm liking that we're seeing more of the kicker in those abilities. Would like to see more of a kicker-focused commander option too. Indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So for 6 mana, you get 3 mana rocks that can tap for 1 mana of any color. I think this is actually pretty sweet, because it's kind of like a Darksteel Ingot. It's indestructible. Most opponents don't care about removing something that's indestructible that only taps for 1 mana. So you're pretty much good to go. You get your mana's worth to, I would say, 6 mana to tap for 3, even if 2 of that comes into play tapped. Pretty good artifact, I would say. Inscription of Insight is a 4 mana blue sorcery with a kicker cost of 4. You can choose one, so you have 3 different modes here. If it was kicked, you could choose any number instead. Return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands. You could scry 2 and then draw 2 cards, which I think is a pretty good ability for blue sorceries, but if you have to pay 8 mana total, you're going to want a little bit more than that. Target player creates an XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the number of cards in their hand, so that's the 3rd mode. I don't think it's worth 8 mana even to do those 3 things, but if you like modes, if you like options, it might be the card for you. We get another blue sorcery. We get Maddening Cacophony, so 2 mana blue sorcery, kicker of 4, so 6 total if you kick it. Each opponent mills 8 cards. If the spell was kicked instead, each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So this is pretty deadly in blue. If you can kick it and then mill a ton, you have a ton of mill synergies that will already benefit from this. And if you can make every opponent mill half their library, I think that's well worth 6 mana. We get a white sorcery undo inversion for 8 mana, destroy all non-land permanents. Pretty simple. Don't know if I like it enough to play it in white. I think 8 mana to pretty much do what Planar Cleansing does. It's a little bit too much, but you can also have the land here. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it taps for 1 white, so I guess that's why it's that expensive. We have Squad Commander for 4 mana. We get a Core Warrior in white, a 3/3. When Squad Commander enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white Core Warrior creature token for each creature in your party. So party is kind of like the new allies. Don't know if I like it. I think the tribal synergy is going to be a lot harder. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible until end of turn. I like Indestructible. I don't know how popular this could be in Commander. Wasn't the biggest fan of allies. I don't think this is going to be much better. We get Scoot Swarm, so I guess this is a reference to Scoot Mob. Get 3 mana, Insect and green, a 1/1 landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So Scoot Mob was like an upkeep trigger where if you had a certain number of lands, I think if you had 6 lands, suddenly it just got bigger and bigger. Scoot Swarm is kind of the same idea where the reward for having it out there when you have more lands is that you just get a copy of a creature that's going to keep getting you more insect tokens. Once you start getting the Scoot Swarm tokens, then you're going to get double of those because each of them is going to trigger. And I think that's pretty sweet. We get a 3 mana green elephant. Well, it's a Kazandu Mammoth, so I guess it's technically an elephant. Landfall trigger. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Nothing to write home about. It does flip into a land, Kazandu Valley. It enters the battlefield tapped. It taps for green. Probably something you're going to want in limited, but other than that, don't think it's going to be that great in Commander. We get this pretty cool looking card here, Skyclave Shade, 2 mana, black shade creature with a kicker cost of 3. This is a 3/1 creature too. It can't block. If Skyclave Shade was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, has a landfall trigger. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if Skyclave Shade is in your graveyard and it's your turn, you may cast it from your graveyard this turn. So that's kind of interesting. I don't think it's going to be good enough to see that much play in Commander. We do get more efficient small creatures like this that keep coming back from our graveyard. You know, like Bloodghast, I think even reassembling Skeleton is still going to be better than this because it's not dependent on whether or not it's your turn. We get a 3-mana black-green Grakmaw Skyclave Ravager, legendary creature Hydra Horror. 0/0, but it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Grakmaw. So it's kind of like modular. When Grakmaw dies, create an XX black and green Hydra creature token, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Grakmaw. So this is all about death triggers if you want to make a death trigger deck. Not that there's any shortage of that, like Aristocrats in Golgari colors, I think there's plenty, but I really like that you have multiple abilities that trigger because of that. So this could be the ideal Gruul commander. Obviously you want to fool around with +1/+1 counters too. Then we have Shadow's Verdict. This is for September 8th. 5-mana black sorcery, exile all creatures and planeswalkers with converted mana cost 3 or less from the battlefield, and all creature and planeswalker cards with converted mana cost 3 or less from all graveyards. Don't know how powerful that's going to be in Commander, but you never know. Something like this could be surprisingly effective. I think a lot of people tend to think that Commander games are all about the biggest spells, and while there's a lot of truth to that, a lot of the best spells are still going to be CMC 3 or less. Oran Reef Ooze, this is a 3-mana green creature I almost didn't notice. When Oran Reef Ooze enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. When Oran Reef Ooze attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. All about the +1/+1 counters, just more of the same, it looks like. Nothing really special. Felidar Retreat, 4 mana, white enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one, create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. I mean, it doesn't do anything super crazy that we haven't seen before, but you're just adding more power and toughness to your creatures, giving them vigilance, which is good in white, or you can get a 2/2 token, which I think they're pretty decent abilities. We get Master of Winds, 4 mana Sphinx Wizard that looks really creepy with a human head. I know Sphinxes are supposed to have like human heads, but I don't know if they're supposed to look that human. So 1/4 flying, when Master of Winds enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery or wizard spell, you may have Master of Winds base power and toughness become 4/1 or 1/4 until end of turn. Just seems like more tribal support, I guess. Instants and sorceries, maybe. Nothing super special, though. It's got a decent ETB, I guess. We get Glasspool Mimic, 3 mana Shapeshifter Rogue. You may have Glasspool Mimic enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature you control, except it's a Shapeshifter Rogue in addition to its other types. So, we get a Rogue Tribal Commander. You get a Rogue Copy creature, too. Also flips into Glasspool Shore, which enters the battlefield tapped, taps for blue. We've seen a lot of that in this set. Agadeem's Awakening, Mythic, black sorcery, 3 black and X. Return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creatures that each have a different converted mana cost X or less. It also flips into a land, Agadeem the Undercrypt. As Agadeem the Undercrypt enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped and taps for 1 black. I don't really think this is anything that special. I think you're going to have to spend a lot of mana into it in order to get a lot of creatures back. Hopefully you don't have to. But if you have a lot of creatures with the same converted mana cost, you're kind of screwed. So I think there are some better ways. I think Living Death is just a better way to get everything you want back, and it's usually effective. We get Ancient Green Warden, 6 mana, Mythic Elemental, 5/7 with Reach. You may play lands from your graveyard. So we get another Crucible of Worlds. That's absolutely wonderful, because if anything needed more power, it's land decks. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So here's the ultimate landfall synergy card. If you want to make more elementals with Omnath Locus of Rage, here you go. And if you also just wanted to combo with a ton of those land decks that can sacrifice lands, benefit off of that, and then just play them back from your graveyard, I think it's more of the same, but it's more of the same of something that's incredibly powerful. We get Null Priest of Oblivion, 2 mana black vampire cleric, a 2/1 with a kicker cost of 4, menace and lifelink. When Null Priest of Oblivion enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now this is something I can get behind. I think this is fundamentally a good card. If you're talking about reanimation, you get 6 mana for a menace lifelink vampire, but you're also getting back anything from your graveyard. I like that it's not vampire specific, but even if it was, I think it would still be pretty solid. Here we get Shatter Skull Charger, 3 mana giant warrior, rare, kicker cost of 2, trample and haste. If Shatter Skull Charger was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. At the beginning of your end step, if Shatter Skull Charger doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, return it to its owner's hand. So it's a 4/3, it could get bigger if you have the kicker cost. Other than that, nothing super special. We get Nimble Trap Finder, 2 mana human rogue, blue, 2/1, Noble Trap Finder, can't be blocked. If you had another cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard enter the battlefield under your control this turn. So it's another party mechanic card. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, creatures you control gain whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card until end of turn. So another coastal piracy ability that's even harder to get to because you do need to have a full party, and that's probably going to be a lot more difficult than people think. We get a cool looking serpent here, Verazal the Split Current, green and a blue and X. Verazal enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each mana spent to cast it. Whenever you cast a kick spell, you may remove 2 +1/+1 counters from Verazal. If you do copy the spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. This is what I'm talking about. I can get behind this commander option because it really rewards you for playing kick spells. You get to copy a spell if you had it kicked. And this could be anything. It could be an artifact like the one we saw earlier that's kicked. It could be an enchantment that's kicked, or sorcery that's kicked, or whatever it's kicked. I think that's pretty cool. Throne of Mackindy is a land. It taps for a colorless, or you can pay 1 mana and tap it to put a charge counter on Throne of Mackindy, and you can tap it to remove a charge counter to add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to cast kicked spells. So we get some more support for a kicker theme. I love that. Not going to be super special anywhere else, obviously. We have Myriad Construct, 4 mana construct, kicker cost of 3, so we get another kicker artifact. If Myriad Construct was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each non-basic land your opponents control. When Myriad Construct becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it and create a number of 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature tokens equal to its power. So this could be pretty massive. Also something I think is going to be good for +1/+1 counter strategies. So for the 9th, it looks like we just get a few cards here, and I'll try to cover whatever I miss if I happen to miss anything for the rest of the day in a follow-up video. We get Cherix the Raging Isle is our only rare here. A 4 mana legendary creature, Leviathan Crab. This thing looks crazy. A 0/17, spells your opponents cast that target it, costs 2 more to cast, has an activated ability of 3 mana. It gets +X, -X until end of turn, where X is the number of islands you control. So you can give it some insane power if you have a ton of islands, and it doesn't look like it's going to kill itself because it has a whopping 17 toughness. This thing is crazy. I don't think it's super flavorful though. I don't think it's going to do anything outside of just having a weird toughness, but that might play into some commander decks, you never know. Here we get some more cards for the commander deck that's coming out alongside the Zendikar Rising set. We get Geode Rager, 6 mana, red elemental creature, a 4/3 with first strike and landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, goad each creature target player controls. I love this. I love the goad ability. It's really Red's way of staying competitive when you have so many board wipes in other colors. While Red does have some decent removal, you do need a way to keep the pressure off yourself and maybe force your other opponents to deal with a threatening board state. Goad is also pretty good if you want to play like a pillow fort strategy, because obviously that opponent can't attack you with their creatures. We get Trove Warden, a 4 mana cat beast in white. Vigilance with a landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile target permanent card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard. When Trove Warden dies, put each permanent card exiled with it onto the battlefield under the control of that card's owner. I think this is really good, and these two cards are obviously going to be in the landfall strategy deck, which in a couple videos ago we had Anawan the Ruin Thief for rogues and Obun Moldaya Ancestor for landfall and +1/+1 counters. I think it's going to be a pretty powerful strategy, especially if we get some decent cards like these. I think Trove Warden offers you a way to get back some of your cheaper cards from your graveyard, kind of like Sun Titan but for landfall. I think that's pretty sweet. And we get 2 more cards. Whisper Steel Dagger, 3 mana artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +2/+0. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a creature spell from that player's graveyard this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. So a lot of the rogues, I think it's very similar to ninjas. It's about being sneaky and dealing damage easily. You're probably going to see a lot of evasion in the rogue strategy, so be prepared to see a lot of deal combat damage triggers. I don't think this one is super powerful. I mean, we do have ways of reanimating creatures from our opponent's graveyards. Doesn't require us to cast them. I don't know. This might be decent. Enigma Thief is a 7 mana Sphinx rogue, so we get a different creature type there with the rogue. Has a prowl cost of 4 mana, so this is a new ability. You may cast this spell for its prowl cost if you dealt combat damage to a player this turn with a Sphinx or a rogue. So that's very specific, so if you want to go with Sphinx Tribal, this deck could even help you out for that. But I doubt people are going to stray away from the rogue strategy. Looks to be pretty interesting. When Enigma Thief enters the battlefield, for each opponent, return up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls to its owner's hand. So it's your simple bounce, which I don't think is super powerful in Commander, but that's all you have in blue. I guess you gotta go with it. And I already covered these 2 Commander options, Obun and Anawan, in the previous spoiler video addressing the Commander options. So if you want to see the description, you can go watch that one or just look it up on mythicspoiler.com or Scryfall or wherever you look cards up. Anyway, hope you guys have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.